platform to connect directly with Pennsylvania voters. Whether it's a presidential race, statewide campaign, or local cause, our viewers are ready to hear from you. Book your ad now. PCN, your access to Pennsylvania voters.
Tired of unbalanced views and networks pushing their own angles? PCN brings it to you straight. We don't edit what was said to fit a point of view. We bring you the entire event. No slant, no editing, the whole story. A complete view without the angle. Watch PCN on cable and on the PCN app. Stream politics and policy on your favorite device for free.
Pennsylvania's 956 boroughs each offer something unique to the Commonwealth. They are filled with culture, commerce, and history. Join PCN and the Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs each month as we journey around the state in Exploring Pennsylvania Boroughs. Go to pcntv.com for more details.
Join our guests for insights on issues impacting local government and the citizens of Pennsylvania. Created by the Pennsylvania State Association of Boroughs, Inside Pennsylvania Boroughs connects you to legislation and policy that will affect you and your family. Your host, Chris Kapp, and his guests discuss current affairs that matter to you most. Connect with your state by tuning into Inside Pennsylvania Boroughs on Sundays here on PCN.
I'm now joined by Representative Seth Grove. He's a Republican from York County. Representative, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you sponsored a bill, House Bill 2463, that relates to right-to-know law requests. What is in that bill?
So House Bill 2463 is pretty simplistic. Number one, it requires the governor to maintain the right-to-know offices throughout an emergency declaration. One of the things we did find troubling was not answering right-to-know requests for a multitude of months. It really impacts citizens gaining information through their government, as well as stymies journalists. While journalists may say they received information, if the governor's office provided maybe not exactly what they wanted, they don't have any recourse of getting the information they need as they do their normal due diligence in writing their stories.
What is
the other? Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the other partial part of the bill opens up data, how the administration collects data, what data they're collecting, and how they use that data at making decisions during emergency declarations. While we're getting what the administration wants us to see, very rarely do we get an open view of how they collect it, what they're collecting, and the total scope of what they're getting. There is I think of a newspaper reporter who used to be able to see what specific dates fatalities were listed, and they would go back and say, okay, we have 10 fatalities today, but they all didn't happen today. To see the lag time between when they reported and actually when the department or when their death certificate was filed and when the actual department reports them. All that information should be under right to know. This makes sure it happens, and it provides all the normal protections under the right to know law. So Section 708 under the right to know has all these exceptions, a multitude of things, all for good purposes, maintains those so there's not trade secrets or school construction building plans. That kind of stuff is not publicly accessible.
Take us to the current law. What does it? How does it address these issues during emergencies?
So under the current law, it stipulates that the governor can shut the offices down during, quote, a state of emergency. Unfortunately, the law envisioned kind of physical destruction, a natural disaster, flooding. So let's say Harrisburg floods, which it has in the past, and employees couldn't access their buildings unless they go in by boat, right? It makes sense to say we're not going to do right to know requests. We're not going to have employees go back into those buildings, get the documents until it's safe to do so. During this pandemic, it's a completely different story. All those buildings are empty. The governor basically told people to go work from home. He didn't furlough employees, so there's nobody actually in those buildings working. So it's very easy for an employee to come back, get the documents they need, and a lot of it's electronic today, right? So a lot of agencies have done digitization of documents, so a lot they can just pull from servers. So there's no real reason not to start doing right-to-know requests. I just got off the phone with my local DA. They were processing right-to-know requests this entire time. The House, the Senate, both Republicans, Democrat caucuses were doing right-to-know requests. The Treasurer, the Auditor General, Attorney General, all were doing right-to-know requests during this pandemic. So it was really some executive agencies that decided, we're just not going to process these at this time, which I real strongly feel they should have. And most can apply for extension. Like mostly when you file a right-to-know request, you're going to get hit with ask for a 30-day extension regardless. It's kind of standard practice. And in case of a pandemic, it's understandable. I'll give them time, and they may need some additional time to actually get the information you need, which again is understandable, but ultimately you get what you're asking for.
So let's go back to March. Was this a decision that the governor himself made, or was it left up to the different agencies to determine how they would handle right-to-know requests?
So it's really unclear to see it within the administration who made the decision to not or to do it. Ultimately, it was probably somewhere in the governor's administration, what we would call the front office, chief of staff, deputy chief of staff, something along those lines made the decision that we're just not going to address these at this time, put a freeze on them, and we'll get to them when we get to them. So it's I don't know if it was a memo with the governor's signature, a verbal. We don't know that at all, but the decision was made throughout. Now, there's some entities that still did do some. The secretaries decided to move forward, but it was really hodgepodge, and most did not do right-to-know requests.
How does your bill address a situation if a Commonwealth agency did not respond to a request?
Yeah, so we did allow them to basically say when this, because the effective date's immediate. So basically all those old right-to-know requests would become non-compliant. So we did allow the agencies to go back and say, you know what, from the date of this is the new start date, so you have time to come back and prepare and move forward with them. Provide them some flexibility. And, that was actually an amendment that the House Democrats offered that we accepted because we said, that makes sense. That's probably the right thing to do. You don't want all these right-to-know requests now non-compliant, because then you got a bunch of court cases to deal with. Let's just bring them up, make them compliant, the effective date of this, and then allow the agencies to get the data and move forward with it. The other thing I want to compliment, and bipartisanship does work. It is a good thing. The protection under the Section 708 exceptions, that was actually a House Democrat idea to make sure that was in there. And again, something we missed, and it was a good idea, and we embedded it, and it passed unanimously through both chambers. So that bipartisanship working together, kind of filling in the gaps, getting some thoughts together, proved, I think, really strengthened this bill.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the bipartisanship. You mentioned that the bills were passed, or the bill was passed unanimously in both houses, and some of this work that you've done with your Democratic colleagues. How did they respond when you first proposed this bill?
Coming out of state government committee, it was bipartisan. There were some Democrats that voted for it, but there was a good number of my Democratic colleagues in state government committee that did oppose it. I think the administration asked for opposition. Working through the process, when we got to the House floor, they did offer some amendments, and we went to them. They're like, "I'm not sure you want these amendments." So we sat down, had a discussion. A lot of kudos to then Leader Cutler, now Speaker Cutler's staff, for sitting down, having conversations. And when his chief of staff brought me kind of what they were looking to do, I'm like, you know what? Most of this stuff we can do. It makes sense. I think there was maybe one thing that was just maybe didn't fit in, but most of their recommendations were solid, good policy, and I think greatly improved the bill. So, we locked that down, did the amendment, passed unanimously, went over the Senate. Took the Senate a little bit of time to get it. They finally got it out of committee, got it moving, and passed again unanimously. So 252 to 0, 202 votes in the House, 50 votes in the Senate. So very, very, very strong, very, very, very strong bipartisan votes.
How often have governors vetoed bills that were passed unanimously?
We did some digging. The last one we found was Governor Schaap, 1978. So it was in September of 1978, which I found interesting because I was born in September of 1979. So it was literally a year before I was born. The Senate, it was a Senate bill that was a school code that provided, I think, psychological services to students, something along those lines. Passed unanimously through the House and the Senate. Governor Schaap vetoed it. The Senate passed it unanimously, did the veto override unanimously, and there were like 6 no votes in the House for veto override, but then it became law. But it was the last time a unanimous bill was vetoed by the governor. So we're looking at 42 years. I know it's 42 because I turned 41 this year. So 42 years ago, the governor vetoed a unanimous bill.
Have you received any indication from the governor's office about how he'll respond to this bill?
To date, it's been they plan on vetoing it. The reasons they bring up to veto, a lot of it deals with that Section 708 I brought up. I don't know why. I don't know if they have bad legal advice or they haven't actually read the bill in current draft. They're worried that opening the data portion up to right to know will open it up to, for some reason the exception's not there, and they'll get all this information that the general public normally can't get under right to know, which is why we have that Section 708 exception language in there to continue to protect it. So I don't know if they're not reading the bill right. I don't know if they're reading the old draft. I don't know what's going on internally. They really haven't called and talked to me at all about it. I'd be more than happy to walk through the bill, how it's set up, how it applies to Section 708 of the current right to know law. I'd work through all those. But we did a press event yesterday with the Pennsylvania News Media Association's general counsel who specializes in right to know law. We addressed a lot of these concerns, and when newspaper reporters reasserted back with the governor's office, they recommitted to their veto, which I think is also sad because, I think the governor has an opportunity to really lay his foundation of legacy for being the most transparent governor in Pennsylvania history. Not only to sign a bill to make sure that right to know offices stay open in a responsible way, but also giving access to that data that's driving it. I'm a firm believer that when government has these superpowers during emergency declaration, they should have super oversight and super transparency too. So I think it sends a message to the residents of Pennsylvania that we are open, we're transparent, we're going to show you how and why we're making the decisions. And if he believes the decisions he is making right is based on that data, they should be able to provide that. So I think it would cement his legacy. And by him vetoing it, I think it does the complete opposite. I think it basically tarnishes any credibility to the Wolf administration and their dedication to transparency.
In the event that the bill is vetoed, do you expect the General Assembly to attempt an override?
I'd like to think so. I really haven't had those conversations yet. I haven't had those conversations with Democratic members or our leadership team. I'm still hopeful that the governor, if he doesn't want to, quote, sign it, it can become law in 10 legislative days if he does nothing. To me, that would be the best avenue moving forward. Just allow it to become law and just let it become law.
Well, Representative Seth Grove, a Republican from York County, thank you for talking with me.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it, and keep up the great work.
This Sunday on the African American Experience.
So we know that large population of African Americans from Alabama migrated to Western Pennsylvania. Some of them came with skills, working in steel mills in Alabama. Some came unskilled. Some left the South because of the racial discrimination. Some left the South just searching for better opportunities.
Dr. Jamie Martin is the president of the Association of the Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties and a professor at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Phil. It's really a great pleasure to be here with you today.
Now, your union recently released a survey of state system faculty members trying to get their ideas on reopening and other coronavirus-related topics. What did you learn about their thoughts on in-person teaching in the fall?
And again, thank you. We sent a survey July 8th through 11th to 4,800 of our members and had 3,200 respond, or just shy of that. So a large response rate. And I think that what I keep saying is the take-home message is the level of concern, the lack of safety that faculty feel going back into the classroom face-to-face with students in the fall. And there seem to be a number of things driving that. I think first and foremost, a concern that students aren't going to appropriately social distance, wear masks whenever they're away from the classroom, so in their residence halls or if they're out in community, and doing the kinds of things that students often do, the same kinds of things I did when I was a college student. Concerns about the availability of testing and contact tracing, and even concerns about cleaning supplies and hand sanitizers and the kinds of things that we need to be able to help mitigate this virus. And so those were the major findings. And the one other that was alarming for all of us was that about 40% of the people who responded said that they have some type of underlying health condition that if they would be exposed to this virus, they'd be at risk for severe illness. And so those are the kinds of things that we were finding just in a nutshell from that survey.
Now, as plans for reopening are unfolding, is that something that is being driven by the state system itself, or are the schools developing their own plans?
Well, the Office of the Chancellor had provided a fall framework and some guidelines to each of the 14 universities. And the guidelines were based on CDC guidelines and guidelines from the Pennsylvania Department of Education. But then once they went to the 14 universities, it was up to each university to implement the guidelines as laid out by the Chancellor. And so we're seeing some differences in the way that they've been implemented. We're even seeing differences in when universities are starting back to class, the structure and format of the classes. Some are thinking about having 2 7-week sessions. Westchester and East Stroudsburg decided that they were going to go fully remote. Some are offering hybrids. It's kind of not a one-size-fits-all, but the concerns of the faculty cut across all 14 universities.
Are faculty members being consulted by the different universities about reopening plans? Are they in part of that process?
Yes, we're hearing, again, different things when I talk with my colleagues at the 14 and our chapter presidents at the 14 universities. So even there's some variation. My understanding is that most of the 14, there were faculty members involved at some level, and it could be varying levels across the 14. But at some places we were hearing that the faculty felt as if they were being involved or included on committees, but not necessarily in the numbers they thought they should be, or that their concerns weren't necessarily being, put into the plans. And so they have consulted, but they're still, when we sent the survey, we were able to see empirically the kinds of concerns that they have.
Now, will faculty members be able to choose to have classes completely remotely, or will they be required to have some in-person classes?
And again, that varies across the 14. As I said, East Stroudsburg, Westchester went completely remote. I know the plans at IUP include some face-to-face classes where you'd have a third of the class in your class on Monday, another third on Wednesday, another third on Friday. So within the week, all of the students would be in there, and then on the days they're not in class, they would Zoom in. But again, some of the concerns are for the idea that if I was in a classroom for 3 consecutive hours in a space that doesn't have good HVAC systems, to be able to get the air cleaned out, and students cycling in and out, that's one issue. The ability to clean classrooms between classes is a concern and probably not possible. having enough classroom space to socially distance, and even to be able to offer the number of face-to-face classes that are scheduled. So at each university, there's a slightly different approach and even different cleaning protocols, all of them hopefully fitting within the guidelines, but certainly leading to a lot of concern, especially among some of our older faculty.
How much authority do faculty members have to enforce things like social distancing or mask wearing? Is that part of the discussion as well?
We have had those discussions. I think at most of the universities, they are working to lay out, move desks or move classrooms so that they're already set up with the appropriate amount of social distancing. Although I heard from some colleagues at one university, they thought that 4 feet instead of 6 feet was enough space. There are concerns about what will happen if students decide I'm not wearing a mask in class, and so to what extent would faculty have the authority to enforce that? And so there are some concerns around that issue as well. And even, again, concerns about, are we going to have enough protective equipment, the PPE, for all of the students, all of the faculty, and even those kinds of basic needs that we would have if everybody's going to be safe. And I guess one of the other things I'd say is that all of the plans are based on the premise that I'm going to do what I need to do to keep you safe, and you're going to do what you need to do to keep me safe. And once that breaks down, then the level of safety or the level of mitigation begins to fall apart pretty quickly.
How has the transition to remote instruction unfolded? In the spring, everything was very quick, and so people were just scrambling to put things together. But now we've had several months to prepare for the fall. I know it's probably different from school to school, but in general, are faculty members and schools in a better position to do remote instruction?
Yeah, and I think you're right. We had to go so quickly in March over maybe a 5, 7, 8 day period to taking everything that you had planned to do in the classroom and all of the different course objectives and requirements and switch those quickly. That was difficult. What I'm hearing from faculty is it would be nice to know exactly what we're going to do moving into the fall. So our colleagues at East Stroudsburg and Westchester now have the time for the rest of this summer to get completely ready to go remote. I know some of the universities had different types of workshops this summer to improve the availability and use of technology. So I think the concern I'm hearing is I feel now as if I'm preparing to be in the classroom face-to-face using a hybrid model, and what's going to happen if we have an outbreak and I have to go completely remote as quickly as I did in the spring, which makes that difficult. So if faculty had enough time, they could certainly have the remote approach look very different now in the fall than it did doing it quickly in the spring.
And who's responsible for providing personal protective equipment? Is that something that is system-wide, or are the schools themselves responsible, or do faculty members have to provide their own?
The universities are, I think, supposed to be ordering the protective equipment. Each student should be getting some type of kit that would include hand sanitizers, masks, those types of things. But at each university, it probably varies in terms of how many masks they would receive. With regard to the faculty, I think they're supposed to have some. I would assume most my colleagues will be using their own reusable, washable kinds of masks. Some places are talking about using the shields, the face shields. Some places are talking about putting plexiglass in front of where the faculty member may be standing at the front of the class. Part of the problem, though, is, when I am teaching, I rarely stay at the front of the class, and so that's going to be even difficult for some people to not be moving around the classroom. And my other concern is if we have plexiglass in front of the faculty member, who's going to clean that when I'm finished and my next colleague's coming into the classroom? So all of those different approaches that are happening at each of the 14, and I think that just leads to many more questions about keeping people safe. And I'm really concerned about keeping our students safe as well, because I have a great concern that if they're back here with 9,000 students and out and about in their places of residence, that this virus could spread pretty quickly among our students. And that if we don't have adequate testing and tracing, it could be a really serious situation for them.
Are there any specific policies that APSCUF would like to see implemented that might improve the situation?
Yeah, what we've really been asking of the administration and of the chancellor's office is, as I mentioned in the survey, we found 40% of the faculty had an underlying condition that could make them at risk of severe illness. They put into place a process for faculty to make a request for a flexible work assignment, meaning that they could choose to teach their classes remotely rather than going into the classroom face-to-face. And at some universities, they've been pretty flexible to allow faculty to teach that way. And at others, they're really sticking with just the CDC guidelines. And so I know of colleagues where they took documentation from a physician saying you shouldn't be face-to-face in the classroom. And because they don't meet the highest tier of the CDC guidelines, the request is being denied. And these are people with, again, identifiable illnesses. And what I also keep saying is my colleagues, they want to teach, they just don't want to get sick. And so if they're teaching remotely, it's not as if they're having a reduced teaching load. They're still teaching the same number of classes. They just don't want to have to be face-to-face in the classroom and risk getting this virus or taking it home to a loved one who may have a compromised immune system or have some other kind of illness that they are dealing with as well.
Well, Dr. Jamie Martin, President of the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, thank you for speaking with me.
Thank you so much, Phil, and you have a wonderful day.
This Sunday on Keystone Cuisine.
So let's go ahead and get our salmon. You see, it's nice and caramelized on one side. We go ahead and check it. Sitting at about a nice medium right now. We're actually gonna let this hang out for a few minutes. One thing I like to do is cook fish on one side only. What that promotes is a little more even cooking process through the actual fish protein itself.
I'm now joined by Chuck Moran. He is the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Licensed Beverage and Tavern Association. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Governor Wolf recently instituted some new restrictions on bars and restaurants. Can you talk a little bit about how those will affect your members?
Sure. And just for clarification, I represent your small business licensed restaurants and taverns. They're your corner bars, your neighborhood restaurants that serve beer and maybe a mixed drink. The order that was provided last week really kind of tightened things up. The first thing that has a lot of my members upset is that they have to, a customer has to order a meal with a mixed drink. There were a lot of questions around that. They're not allowed to be seated at a bar. They have to be in a booth or at a table. And for indoor service, it cuts it down to 25% occupancy, which what I'm hearing since then has made it quite problematic for a lot of my members to really make a go of it with those conditions.
Now, your organization has proposed a relief package to help its members. I just want to talk about a few of those elements. One thing that you say that you would support is House Bill 2615, which would establish a community cornerstone grant program. What would that do?
Well, that's a current bill that's sitting there waiting. It's been up there for about a month, but it would create grants to help these businesses pay for things that they've had to do to come into compliance under the latest orders. We have a lot of members that have gone out, spent a lot of money to put outdoor seating in. They've bought the plexiglass, stuff like that. And they don't have that extra money right now. And with the state creating these orders, the state needs to step up and find ways to help take the stress out of the situation. In our meeting last week, just prior to this announcement, when we were told by the governor's office, we said to him, it'd be nice when you deliver this bad news that you could deliver some good news at the same time. And that could be part of the good news. Some type of relief package, lobby for us to help our industry a little bit.
Now, your organization is also calling for the elimination of license fees and surcharges for liquor-related service establishments. How would that benefit your organizations?
Yeah, that's a big one, really. And it's really a matter of principle. They're paying for these licenses. In some cases, they're paying, in addition to their normal license, they're paying for a small games of chance license, an entertainment permit, a Sunday permit. But to give you an example, with the entertainment permit, that allows people to allow dancing in their location, but they're not allowed to dance right now. They're not, dance floors are supposed to be closed. So why do they have to pay those fees now? And especially since they're not allowed to operate at full capacity, there needs to be some relief. It should be some type of situation to help them now. And then, they're looking at a recovery that could take a long time. You had asked me a few minutes ago about, what's happened since this most recent revised order. I've talked to a number of places that just said, the customers are not returning. People who are doing things right, following the law, they're just not returning. So this is going to take a while for them to recover.
Another provision was the permanent acceptance of mixed drinks to go. Can you talk a little bit about that? Was that a new thing that was just implemented recently?
Yeah, the mixed drink to go legislation, it's a temporary legislation as long as the governor's order is in place. Places prior to that could not allow drinks with spirits to go. They could do malt-based beverages, your 6-packs to go, your what you often see is the slushies to go and stuff like that. But as far as if you wanted a fancy, nice mixed drink, that wasn't permitted. Ourselves, along with the Restaurant Association, fought very hard up at the Capitol, and there was legislation earlier this year that passed overwhelmingly to allow that to happen. It's a temporary thing. We think it's time to make that permanent, and other states are starting to move in that direction as well. That would be a nice add-on for the R and H licenses moving into the future as they try to recover.
Now, another provision would be to allow licensed establishments to pick up and deliver their own malt beverage orders. What types of products are we talking about there?
That's beer, basically. That's your malt-based beverages. When an establishment has a delivery to them, they're paying a fee for that delivery. And with more players in the market selling beer, such as your grocery stores and convenience stores, they're often the last one left out. And there have been some problems with getting supplies from time to time. It would be a nice way for the state to say to the bars and taverns, look, we're thinking of your future. Let's at least allow you to pick up a limited supply so you don't get hit with those fees for delivery.
Now, outdoor seating has become one of the things that restaurants and bars can do, but there's a cost, as you've mentioned before, in terms of establishing that. Are there policies or different provisions that can be implemented to encourage outdoor seating?
Well, I think the governor and the state's doing everything possible to encourage outdoor seating. It's something that right now is necessary. My members worry a lot about what happens when the winter colder months come. When that's not possible. And the state was good to my members by allowing licensed premise extensions for free. They did a very efficient job of getting that moving quickly. But again, outdoor seating, I don't know, but sitting outside in 90-degree temperatures isn't the most pleasant thing. So between bad weather and the future with the winter, that may not be the best way to enjoy an experience at a restaurant.
Now, some restaurants are able to make some money through delivery, but there are third-party delivery organizations. How do their delivery charges play into what restaurants and bars are charging?
Yeah. Often, people use apps on their phone to have food delivered. Depending upon where you're at in the country, the restaurants that are participating with those apps, they pay a pretty high fee. I know in certain parts of rural Pennsylvania, they're paying up to 30% of the bill to have their food delivered. That's something that could be looked at, maybe putting a limit on how much they can charge. It would help the restaurants, that's for sure. And frankly, I think that more restaurants might get involved in projects like that if they knew that they could make a little bit more money and wouldn't be paying such a high fee.
What types of response have you gotten from the legislature to these proposals?
Well, we know that in the upcoming weeks there's going to be some legislative hearings. We were invited to one today. We'll be participating in those hearings. There seems to be a lot of interest in trying to find ways to help the restaurants and bars and taverns. We think that there's a lot of good ideas. We think the Restaurant Association has a lot of good ideas. Certainly there's a lot of people struggling out there. And, you know, it's an industry that, quite frankly, has been hit hard, very, very hard since March, and it keeps getting hit. And we need to find ways to save this industry because it's a major employer in Pennsylvania. And we got to make sure that those jobs are there for when we either get to herd immunity or there's a vaccine and we start to get back to some sense of normalcy.
Has your organization been able to provide input with the governor's office or the health department when these types of restrictions are discussed?
We're certainly involved in conversations that goes on. We regularly have contact with the governor's office. We provide input. We've provided input in the past. They've invited us in to discuss things. And we also very, very often meet with various legislators, senators, and representatives on our proposals and other issues as well.
Well, Chuck Moran, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Licensed Beverage and Tavern Association, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Get a deeper understanding of Pennsylvania politics and policy with On the Issues. Watch Tuesdays and Thursdays at 8 p.m. PCN, Pennsylvania Politics and Policy.
I'm here with Dr. James Coyle, Professor of Communication Science and Disorders at Pitt School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So for people who have had very severe cases of